The prince went to a blind date expecting a noblewoman, but instead found the maid as his companion. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The Marchmonts had promised a quiet room and a modest welcome. London carried on outside with its carriages and sighs and worn pavements. Inside, beeswax had been rubbed to a patient shine, and the sconces gave a steady light. The Prince of Wessex entered with the air of a man prepared to do a graceful duty. He wore his composure like a well-cut coat. He did not bring an entourage, only a valet who vanished at the door. Helena curtsied, as she had been taught by watching others. Not too deep, not too bold. She kept her gaze low to the carpet's border. She had a tray in her hands and a small weight in her chest. The housekeeper, Mrs. Betts, had said to hold steady. Pour. Remove yourself. Leave no trace but a circle of tea and a cup and a crumb here and there. Lady Eugenia had added in a whisper, "We will be but a moment, my dear." There had been a hand on Helena's shoulder then. A light pressure. Panic. Polite as lace. The prince's presence changed the air. He greeted the room first, then the mantel, then the chair he would sit in. Only then did he incline his head to the woman who poured his tea. It was done without rudeness. It was done as if every part of the evening had an order and a measure. Helena found comfort in that order. She understood measures. She measured flour by the cup and thread, by the inch and steps, by the space between the banister posts. She could feel the door close behind Lady Eugenia. She could feel the hush that followed. It was the hush of a hallway without servants, the hush when one hears the household strain. She poured, and did not spill. She asked as one does whether His Highness took sugar. He looked at the bowl as if it were a question of policy. "One lump, if you please." She steadied the tongs. The single cube clicked against china, sharp and clear. She heard it like a bell. She lifted the pot and poured a line of amber that trembled only at the end. Steam rose and vanished. She replaced the pot on its stand. She waited for the prince to speak first, for that was safe. "You came with the Marchmonts," he said. She allowed her eyes to lift to his chin. Only that far. Her answer held to the line set by the evening. "I am engaged to the house, sir." Engaged, not employed. Old-fashioned, Mrs. Betts would say later. But old words made a little space to breathe. He nodded. "Your mistress is indisposed." "So I was told, sir." He did not ask what indisposed meant. He did not need to. He let silence work for him. He tested whether silence would set her talking. She did not speak. She arranged the extra spoon as if it needed arranging. The small spoon was a comfort. It had one task and did it daily. You could trust a spoon. He glanced at the mantel. She did not look there yet. She wanted to, because her hands had been there in the morning polishing. She had wiped the small square where a miniature hung. The small oval case had a ribbon that was soft and much handled. People touched it when they stood by the fire. She had noticed that. She had noticed a great many things. She could not afford to admit it. He said without urgency, "I had understood Miss Marchmont would be at home." Helena kept her hands at her sides. She tilted the pot to show it was ready if he wished for more. "I could not say, sir." That was as true as one could be and remain within the boundary of a servant. He seemed to recognize the boundary. He did not press. He sat back. His gloves were on the side table, neatly stacked. He had been taught to place them like that. It looked like nothing at all. It spoke of years of training. It made Helena's throat burn for a foolish second, because care was care, whether one learned it for a palace or a pantry. He took a sip. He did not add milk. He did not wince. He said, as if to no one, "The city is thawing. People show their faces again. The season, sir. Yes, the season." He smiled the smallest amount. The season was a great boat that carried everyone along, whether they wished to float or not. Helena could picture the boat. She could not picture herself on it. He said, "I was told Miss Marchmont reads French." Helena said nothing. Her tongue shaped words and put them away again. She had read a little French. A thin book that Mrs. Betts had rescued from a trunk meant for the dustman. It had nouns for rooms and verbs that handled teacups and doors. Helena could say, "I go, I come, I put down." She would not say this now. The prince went on as if trying the edge of the water. "Do you read, Miss Helena?" "Sir." "Do you read, Helena?" She thought of the small primer she kept under her straw mattress. She thought of the man who had taught her letters, retired now, with hands the shape of spades. She thought of evenings where candle ends were guarded like treasure. She answered simply, "A little, sir." He spoke gently. What sort of little? She breathed. She let the truth out as far as it could go, without endangering anyone but herself. Letters, bills, receipts, verses sometimes if the print is large. He did not look amused, he looked interested. His interest did not feel like a trap. It felt like finding one window in a closed room. Verses. Hymns, sir. He nodded again. He had a way of nodding that was honest. He was not pretending to be moved. He was gathering a fact and placing it in his mind where it belonged. Helena was not accustomed to her facts being kept tidy by gentlemen. He said, "Would you pour for yourself and sit?" Her heart knocked twice. "Sit? In this room, in sight of the portraits. The staff did not sit here. The staff's bodies learned the shape of door frames and narrow chairs in service corridors. But Lady Eugenia had not returned. The footman had not come. A silence as delicate as spun sugar stretched and did not break. She did not sit. She could not. She said softly, "I will stand, sir." "As you wish." He did not push her. He lifted his cup. He drank with an ease that could be called grace. He seemed to find no fault with the tea or the companionship of a woman in a plain gown, who stood with her hands still. An edge of the room tugged at Helena. The mantel, the empty space where the miniature hung. It was not simply missing. Its absence had a shape. Even the dust had abated, leaving an oval shadow. Helena told her eyes to be content with the pattern in the carpet. She traced the vines with her gaze. She walked them around their loops as if they were a path she could take out of the room. The door opened with a smooth swing. A cousin slipped in, red-faced, apologizing with the practiced speed of a family used to putting out little fires. He bowed to the prince. He begged 1,000 pardons. He blamed a draught. He blamed the weather. He promised every moment would be worth it. He backed away with elegance and a trembling hand. He shut the door. The latch clicked a hair too loud. Helena did not move. The prince's mouth tipped as if the absurdity had given him a private amusement, quickly set aside. He said, as if picking up a conversation that had not previously existed, "What would you teach a village if you could teach it one thing?" The question landed like a pebble in water. It rippled. She could either hide behind the word "sir" or step onto the ripple and ride it. She said, without lifting her head, "I would teach the cost of chalk, sir." He sat forward by a degree. "Chalk? Yes, it is cheap when one buys it by the dozen. It is dear when one must walk to the next parish to find a shop that will sell one piece. If one knows the true cost, one does not waste. One does not scold a child for breaking a stick when the floor is uneven." He was silent in a way that invited more. Helena added, "And I would teach how to cut a quill so it lasts. Blunt at first, then finer. Then hold the hand light. Heavy hands break more than pens." He said, "And you would not teach letters first? Letters come if there is something to write. People write what they need. Names, lists, lines of a hymn that will not leave the head. A love note, perhaps, folded very small." She wished she had not said that last. The word love had a way of causing mischief when it escaped. She waited for his pause to become pointed. It did not. He received the word with no more fuss than he gave to chalk. "You speak as if you have taught," he said. "No, sir. I have only watched." He looked toward the window as a carriage clattered past. He looked back at Helena as if he had drawn a breath and found it steadier than before. "What has watching taught you?" She did not have to invent an answer. It had been living in her for years. To speak less and listen more, and to ask for the thing one needs in the fewest words possible. Fewer words give less room for a no. "Did you ask for this?" he said with care. "This room, this evening?" "No, sir." He did not either, she thought. That knowledge sat between them like a small common cushion, worn and good. The door opened again. Lord Ashbury arrived with the slipperiness of an eel. He was courteous, without warmth. His eyes ran over the prince with admiration. They skimmed Helena with calculation. He presented himself as a man who could fix an inconvenience by merely looking at it and naming it something else. He spoke of nerves. He spoke of misunderstandings. He spoke of timing, which had gone awry and would right itself only if grace were extended this once. He had the air of a man wrapping gifts and setting them aside for later use. The prince answered with words that were clean, but left no traces of agreement. He did not pick up the parcels Lord Ashbury tried to place in his hands. He said, in effect, that he would wait for the house to be ready to present the person he had been invited to meet. He said he had no wish to disturb anyone's health. He said the evening was pleasant enough as it was. Lord Ashbury smiled and did not enjoy it. He sent a glance toward the tea tray. Helena lowered her eyes. He looked at the mantel and did not look twice. He murmured something about art and family treasures, and how charming it was when simple things delighted. The word simple hit Helena like a pinch. He left soon after, all politeness. The silence he left behind was quieter by a degree. Helena learned the flavor of it in the next breath. It tasted like threat laid aside, not threat removed. She lifted the pot and asked, very poised, "More, sir? Please." She poured again. The room felt thicker now. She could not tell whether the thickness came from the prince's thoughts, or her own, or the house beyond the door that kept not delivering the expected young lady. Her dress's hem scratched her ankles. Mrs. Betts had mended it in a haste that afternoon, stitching new canvas into the lining to give it weight and hide tired frays. The stitches were firm. The needle had nicked Helena's thumb once and drawn a pinprick of blood. Small sacrifices for a tidy hem. She approved of tidy hems. They kept one from shame. The footman came in with the silent neatness of a man who knew how to be unseen. He adjusted a sconce, though it did not need adjusting. He went to the tea table and, with a gesture too quick for dignity but slow enough not to alarm, slid a folded scrap beneath the porcelain stand. It was done as if he had placed a dish of jam. It was done at the exact moment Helena's hands lifted to move the sugar bowl. She saw the paper. Of course she saw it. She saw everything that belonged to a table. She saw the small smear of wax on one corner of the scrap. The wax held a crease with stubbornness, as if it had been pressed with something, not a seal but a mark. She saw the shallow lattice on the wax's surface. Her breath paused. She had seen that pattern recently. She had pressed it without thinking into a strip of wax to test whether it would hold. It was the edge of the canvas, stitching Mrs. Betts had tacked along Helena's hem. The footman left with the same quiet. The room took him back as if he had never been there. Helena did not touch the paper. Touching it would be to claim it, not touching it would be to deny it. Either way, she would soon be required to do more than breathe. She glanced once at the prince's face. He gazed at nothing in particular. It was the sort of gaze that notices when nothing unusual is happening and when everything is. He lifted his cup with an absence of flourish that had its own kind of emphasis. He set the cup down again, measure for measure. He did not speak. She wanted him to speak. She did not want him to speak. Helena placed the sugar bowl at the edge of the tray. She let her fingers hover over the folded scrap and then withdraw. It was not fear so much as a precise calculation. The paper was not meant to be found by eyes like his. It was meant for a woman with calluses who would be dismissed without cause. It was meant for someone who could be blamed. She breathed once more to make herself ordinary. She met the teapot with her hand and adjusted it by a half-inch. The movement gave her cover to slide 2 fingers beneath the stand and touch the edge of the paper. It was cool. It fluttered. She did not draw it out. She confirmed only that it existed and would obey her if called upon. The prince's glove on the side table caught the corner of her eye. She looked away quickly. She had a foolish thought of putting a glove on top of the paper, like a stone upon a letter. Ridiculous. She was not a mistress in her own drawing room. She was a maid who knew exactly how many steps there were from this table to the door, and which floorboard would creak if she moved on it now. He said, as if they were processing an order of fish, "I am fond of tea taken without a crowd." She could not tell if it was a courtesy to ease the strain, or a key turned in a lock she had not known was near. She said, so softly the room barely heard, "It spares the tea the trouble of pleasing too many." He looked amused again, not enough to be cruel, enough to be companionable. It was the first moment that felt like the two of them understood the rules of a conversation that neither of them had come to have. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her hem brushed her ankle once more. The scratch of canvas reminded her of the stitch pattern in the wax. The wax on the paper on the table that sat between her and the prince like an invitation and a dare. The house did not breathe. The house held its breath. The door opened again. It was no one and everyone. A servant to say that Lady Eugenia sent apologies and requested that His Highness forgive a delay. There was a gentle hum of words that did not say the real thing. The real thing was that someone wanted the prince to leave tonight with no face attached to the plan for his future. The real thing was that the house could not be ready for the purpose they had set. The real thing was that the house wanted to press the evening into a shape that did not fit. The prince accepted the apology. He accepted it as a man accepts a coat that is not his size but is respectable. He did not stand. He did not declare offense. He remained and made the room warmer simply by deciding to stay. Helena dared one glance toward the mantel. The oval mark where the miniature had hung was now as obvious as a missing tooth. She swallowed quietly. She had wiped that shadow clean this morning while Mrs. Betts spoke of almonds and the laundress, and whether the new footman could be trusted to keep his opinions to himself. Helena had not been asked to evaluate the footman. She had opinions and kept them. She had another opinion now. She did not put a name to it. Names made things heavier. She preferred weight she could carry. The prince set his cup on the saucer with a sound as small as a drop of rain. He looked at Helena then, not as a man looks at a woman in her best gown, but as a man looks at another speaker in a room where truth has been wrapped in muslin and tied with twine. She placed her hand on the handle of the pot. She did not lift. She waited. He said, and his voice was low because the room was listening, "Would you permit me one impertinent question? Sir, what were you thinking when you noticed the empty hook?" Her heart jolted. She had not looked there. She had not. Not truly. But he had. He had seen her not look. Her answer was care and caution in equal measure. "I was thinking that someone would notice before me. And if no one noticed, then it would not be my place to begin the noticing, sir." He seemed to accept the wisdom and the pain inside that answer. He took another sip. The tea had cooled. He did not seem to mind. Helena could not stand in the same shape any longer. Her body needed to change the angle of itself to remain invisible. She shifted back one step. The floorboard did not creak. She felt queerly proud of that. A light press of air moved in the room. Perhaps the chimney had sighed. Perhaps a door down the hall had opened. The folded scrap shifted beneath the stand, betraying its corner to the light. The wax caught the candle and held a tiny gleam. It looked for a breath like an eye. Now she had to decide whether to make her hands the hands of someone who obeyed a message, or the hands of someone who pretended it was for someone else. Both choices would cost. Both choices would pay. She put the sugar tongs down. She folded her fingers under the flawed edge of the paper. She could draw it into the safe valley of the tray, let the cloth conceal it, and carry it out to her narrow world, where doors closed and girls read by candle stubs. Or she could leave it and prove to the room and the man in it that she knew nothing. The prince watched the airs and graces with the patience of a clerk sorting correspondence. His stillness created space, and that space asked something of Helena. She felt the question enter her bones. She felt her answer rise. Before she could move, he reached for his cup. His hand was steady. He did not hurry. He lifted, and the porcelain met his mouth with that small civil sound the room had learned. He did not look at the folded scrap. He did not look at her hand. He spoke to the air above the table. His tone was conversational, private, designed to leave no bruise on the night. "If that paper is yours, you must not leave it on the table." Helena did not reach quickly. She covered the paper with the shadow of her hand and the corner of the tray cloth. She lifted the teapot as if that had been her object all along. She poured a little into the prince's cup that did not need pouring. The steam smelled of bergamot and steadiness. Her fingers closed over the folded scrap. She drew it into the valley of linen and porcelain and made it part of the table's innocence. "Thank you," she said, although he had not handed her anything, and he nodded as if thanks could be given for discretion as easily as for sugar. The door opened not with a crash, but with the correctness of a hinge well oiled. Lord Ashbury returned, or perhaps he had never gone far. He came with apology and the kind of smile that answers its own questions. He bowed. He addressed the prince. He named again his regret that nerves and air had conspired to delay the meeting. He blamed the city's damp for every indisposition. He admired the prince's patience. In the space between his words, He catalogued the room with quick pinches of his gaze. "You are very good to indulge our little storm, Your Highness," he said. "Lady Eugenia is mortified. Miss Marchmont wilts under the very idea of causing inconvenience." "It is no inconvenience," the prince said, and his voice had the grace of a door left open to a garden. "I am content with the quiet." At that, Lord Ashbury's eyes passed over Helena again, as if remembering that quiet had a face tonight. He advanced 2 paces into the room, and then remembered to stop, to show he knew where he stood in relation to rank. His pause put him at the exact distance from Helena that let him see her without seeming to see her. "My compliments to the household," he said. "The staff manages these little exigencies with rare tact. It is a comfort to know a house has such resources." Resources was a word that might have meant tea or skill, or the woman holding both. Helena's pulse steadied itself because panic would have put a tremor in the tray. She kept her chin low. She kept the folded scrap pressed to the wood under the cloth, where no eyes could find it but hers. The prince lifted his cup. He did not attempt to make Lord Ashbury at ease, nor did he punish him. He regarded the man as he might regard a difficult schedule, something to be handled by attending to time, rather than to personality. Lord Ashbury tried a new angle. He turned his smile toward the mantel as if art were a mutual friend. One must love a gallery that lives. A family changes. Portraits move as bonds of affection evolve. I have always admired the Marchmonts for keeping their pieces close rather than vaulting them away. Helena felt that pinch again. He had felt the gap. He was naming it without naming it. His words were an arm around a shoulder that did not want to be touched. The prince did not look at the mantel. He said only, "I admire houses that keep their living members well." Ashbury's smile thinned. He knew when an exchange was not his to improve. He backed to the door with another tidy apology. "I will leave you to your tea. Should you require an escort, Your Highness, my carriage waits. I never let my horses suffer long harness when there is no cause. The very best evening to you." Helena listened to the soft closing of the door, as one listens to the last note of a hymn hanging in the rafters. The room felt larger by an inch. She kept her hands steady until the prince finished his cup. He placed it down with that raindrop sound that said enough for now. "You have saved a number of things from falling tonight, Miss Helena," he said quietly. "I thank you. I have only done my work, sir. Sometimes doing one's work is the brave act." She did not let herself answer. The compliment, even this gentle, could not be caught with both hands. She might drop something else. A footman's shadow moved past the keyhole. A murmur in the hallway rose and fell like a tide. The house was thinking again, and when houses think, servants are the thoughts that move. The prince stood. He put his gloves on as if they were the last words in a sentence. He bowed a little toward Helena. It was not the bow he would give a lady, nor the nod he would give a lackey. It was something in between. He turned to the door. "Pray tell Lady Eugenia that I regret the indisposition and will hope to pay my respects to the family at a better hour," he said. "And Miss Marchmont, of course." "Yes, sir." He paused 1 heartbeat more. He looked as if he might say something not appropriate to a quiet room full of ears. He did not. He left, and Mr. Penworth, the valet, slid from the shadows to join him like a line drawn with a ruler. Helena did not exhale until they were gone down the hall. She set the tray upon the side table. She kept the cloth draped in a way that covered the folded scrap. She lifted the sugar bowl with her left hand and the stand with her right. She moved to the service door, not the hall door. She met not the corridor, but the narrow passage that led to the back stairs. It was the staff's skeleton. It held the house upright. Mrs. Betts was there as if she had been invented by panic. She took one look at Helena's face and shifted from bustle to shield. "What is it?" Helena spoke without showing her teeth, the way one speaks when one has to be quiet to be heard. "A paper. Slipped to the table. For me, I think." Mrs. Betts extended a hand. "Put it here. Let the table belong to me, and not to you." Helena slid the folded scrap under the tray cloth and into the pocket of Mrs. Betts's apron. The housekeeper did not open it. She felt it with her fingers and frowned at the wax. "Who left it?" "I could not say. Could not or must not." "Both." Mrs. Betts's mouth became a straight line. She nodded once. "Good girl. Keep your face with nothing on it when you go back out. I will look at this where the walls do not talk. Then you will come to the still room for word." "Yes, Mrs. Betts, and Helena. Yes, do not let anyone decide what you saw. That was an odd sentence. Helena folded it into the pocket of her mind beside the fear. She nodded. She carried the tray back to the service hall and then to the pantry. She washed cups. She watched suds climb imperceptibly down the stack of plates. She listened for the sound of running footsteps that mean alarm, and the cut glass clink that means company will be kept in the front stairs. The house produced neither. It simply reassembled itself around an absence. By the time Helena went up to her bed under the eaves, the Marchmonts had drifted to their rooms like leaves finding corners. She undid her gown. She laid it across the chair. She stared at the hem without fully seeing it. She extinguished her candle twice by accident because she had lit it without needing the light. She lay down and curled as if that made her take up less space in the world. She did not sleep far. The city's breath came through the shutter and told her the hour by the way coaches slowed. She heard the milkwoman's cart and the rattle of bottles. She slept a little more. She dreamed of a teacup balanced on a fence that could not be asked to hold it. When sound woke her the next time, the house was a hive again. She went to her duties. She kept her face with nothing on it. The morning parlours wanted light and bread and the smell of coffee arranged for a niece who had not slept. The fires needed coaxing. The stair carpets needed straightening, or the mistress saw them crooked no matter the angle. Helena did these things with the hands that belonged to them. Her head kept one idea in its centre, like a coin under a thumb. The scrap of paper with wax that remembered her hem. In the kitchens, the newspapers from the early rounds lay folded. The footmen liked to mock them and believe them and deny them by turns. They were dangerous in the way stew is dangerous when it burns the lip. Helena avoided them like a sensible maid avoids a pot handled without a cloth. She failed to avoid one. The boy sent to fetch oysters tore open a sheet and stared. "Lawks," he breathed. "Look at this." A meeting what was not. "Hush," Mrs. Betts said. She took the sheet before the boy could run it up the stairs. Her eyes moved. Her face moved less. She folded it again. She placed it on the table by the salt. She looked at Helena as if the page had addressed her by name. "Go up," she said, quiet as a pin. "Lady Eugenia will ring." And Helena, "After you are sent away, go to the still room, not before. After I am sent away, do not ask questions. The house will answer for you in 5 minutes." The house did ring. Lady Eugenia sent for Helena with a bell that trembled, so the tone came in parts. Helena went, the way one goes under a sky about to rain, careful not to shape the shoulders as if to keep them dry. Lady Eugenia stood at her writing desk. She was not dressed to receive. She wore a shawl that had been put on backwards and then corrected. Her hair had been hastily redone. She held a letter opener as if it were a pencil one writes with when one is thinking too hard to write. "Helena," she said, and her voice was gentle, which was worse than sharpness. "We are very much obliged to you for your assistance last evening." "Yes, my lady. It was most unfortunate that our cousin, who is usually so reliable, failed to manage the introductions. It made everything thinner. The walls, the air. I am sure you felt it." "Yes, my lady. You will of course say nothing. You will not be asked about last night. You did not see the person you were not asked to see." Helena swallowed. The words in her throat felt lined with sand. She kept her speech small. "No, my lady." Lady Eugenia set down the letter opener. She twisted her ring once. She looked toward the window as if her own reflection stood there and might offer advice. "There is talk this morning," she said, in the tone of someone who cannot be surprised but feels each blow anyway. "A sheet has printed and something. A servant in a drawing room at a delicate hour. It is—" She stopped. "It is a seed. It may not grow. It must not grow." Helena kept her hands clasped. "What would you have me do, my lady?" "Exactly what you will do best. Work very hard. Be seen not at all. Keep to the lower stairs. Avoid the tradesman's door where lads think it amusing to ask questions because the girls are not free to answer. I will send Miss Lydia away to my sister until this month turns again. You will be sent nowhere. You belong here. Do not let anyone move you in your mind. Do you understand me, Helena?" "Yes, my lady." Lady Eugenia's composure faltered in a single honest way. She lifted her hand and set it on Helena's sleeve for the second time in 2 days. "I am sorry to ask this of you. It is not fair that the quietest of us must do the heaviest quieting. But I depend upon you. We all do. The touch burned and comforted at once. Helena curtsied, her head bent. She withdrew with the care of someone leaving a room full of crystal. On the landing she met Lord Ashbury coming up as if he lived there. He did not stop her. He did not fail to notice her. He brought his smile down like the sun pulled through a narrow gap in cloud. "My compliments," he said softly as he passed. "You carry tea with a serenity we could all learn from." Helena kept walking. She did not answer. She did not give him so much as her profile. She listened for his step at the door. She heard his smooth tone meet Lady Eugenia's strained one and become smoother still. The walls took the words in and kept their meaning. Helena went on. She did as she had been told. She cleaned where no one would look. She moved where no one preferred to see. She kept out of sight until keeping out of sight became a brand hung around her neck by other people's guesses. Girls in the laundry asked in whispers if it was true, though they did not say what it was. The scullery maid looked at Helena as if courage might be caught like a cold if she stood too near. The footman performed nonchalance and failed. By afternoon the air had grown an extra skin. The house breathed more shallowly. Miss Lydia was in the carriage. Boxes creaked. Helpless objects made their way to safety as if they had agency. The cook banged 2 pots together more than was needed. It was not an accident. It was a drumbeat to keep the girls steady. Helena waited for the still-room hour like a woman waits for water. When it came, she went. The still-room was small and smelled of lavender, vinegar, and long faithfulness. Maid. Betts waited with her hands folded the way a woman folds them when she is deciding which string will hold a thing without breaking it. "I have read it," she said. "Come sit on this stool, because you will not like to be standing for it." Helena sat. Her knees were together. Her back was flat. Her chin wanted to lower and refused. Mrs. Betts unfolded the scrap with the gravitas one gives a letter from someone who has no right to write to you, and writes anyway. The wax seal had never been a seal, only a pinch of melted candle pressed against a grit to hold the paper closed. The grit held the pattern of canvas stitching. Mrs. Betts tapped it. "This is the hem," she said. "Yours, the one I mended. I did not put this there." "No, Mrs. Betts." The words were written in a hand that wished to look like a gentleman's and failed by a degree. It wanted to slant without losing legibility. It wanted to command while pretending to request. It said, "You will come to Vauxhall Gardens at the 3rd hour after twilight, near the Chinese pavilion, where the lanterns hang low. Bring the small portrait from the Marchmont mantelpiece. You are seen. The portrait buys your safety." Helena felt heat crawl up her neck and then down her spine. She could not tell if the heat was fear or anger. It was both. The note assumed a theft. It assumed she would do the note's work to protect herself from the note's threat. It assumed she was a hinge that would swing any way a push was given. "I have never touched that thing," Helena said. "I saw the space where it was not, and that is all." "I believe you," Mrs. Betts said. "And I believe the person who put this in your path does not care whether you have touched it or not. They care that you can be made to carry a message. Who do you think—" "I am careful what I think where walls live. Thoughts make paths and paths show footprints. But I know a pressman's smell when I pass it at the tradesman's corner. And I know Lord Ashbury's way of talking, as if he has done nothing at all while your own eyes contradict you." Helena held out her hand. "Let me keep it." Mrs. Betts hesitated. Then she placed the paper in Helena's palm. "You will keep it because you will not do what it says. You will keep it because it is proof that something was asked of you and refused. You will keep it because your safety will not be bought with anything that belongs to somebody else. What am I to do about Vauxhall?" "Nothing without counsel, which is to say nothing," Mrs. Betts said. "You will not go alone to that place for any man's amusement. If there is a meeting to be had, it will be had where ladies with sense go for lemon water and to listen to musicians, not in the dark walks where boys frighten girls for practice. We will speak to the mistress. We will speak to no one else. We will not feed the sheet makers." Helena closed her fingers over the paper. It made no weight. It made a weight of its own sort, which lived in the chest. She returned to her work. She did not feel cowardly because she did not run out the door waving truth like a flag. She knew what flags do. They snap in wind that does not care who is beneath them. In the late afternoon, Lady Eugenia sent for Helena again, this time to the small sitting room, where embroidery frames kept company with cooling cups of tea. Lord Ashbury was there. He did not sit. He stood with a balance that felt like a cat on a rail. "Helena," Lady Eugenia said, the paper trembling in her fingers, not because she was weak, but because she was angry with herself for needing to ask. "We find ourselves at an awkward corner. It seems someone has spirited away a family piece. An old thing, sentimental value only. There is a suggestion that someone was noticed in the gallery." Lord Ashbury's politeness sharpened. "We would not ask you an improper question," he said, making improper into a cushion. "We would ask you only whether you may have seen a person pass, perhaps in haste, perhaps before your time." Helena met Lady Eugenia's eyes, not his. She answered quietly, "I saw the place where something was not. I did not see a person. I was with the tea." Ashbury smiled as if she had told a joke at which he might claim credit. "Of course you were," he said. "You are always with the tea. How admirable to be known so well by your work." Lady Eugenia said, "That will be all, Helena." As Helena reached the door, Lord Ashbury added, "The printer's men are rough with language and loose with facts. If you hear such fellows at the tradesman's entrance, you will go another way." "Yes, my lord." She went. She stood in the hall outside and let her breath return to a rhythm. The house was kind, as houses go. It had not been unkind to her today. It had needed something from her and asked badly. That was all. Evening rolled in on its quiet wheels. The bells of St. George's marked the hour like stitches one could count. Helena finished her tasks and carried her own small supper upstairs, wrapped in a napkin. The dormer window gave her a strip of sky. She ate and tasted none of it. She set aside the bread. She opened the seam at the hem of her dress with a needle borrowed from her hair. She did this because she could not do it. The urge had sat behind her ribs all day and asked. She teased out the tiny stitches that Mrs. Betts had made in haste. She slipped 2 fingers into the new canvas. She felt nothing but cloth. She went lower. At the very bottom, a place where the thread had doubled, her finger caught on a hardness that did not belong to fabric. She pinched. She drew it out. Another strip of paper lay coiled like a worm in rain. It had ridden with her all day. It had been stitched into the place that scratched her ankle. She did not light the candle. She took the note to the window and used the last grey of the hour to read. Her throat narrowed as if the words were smoke. The message was not the same as the one from the tray. It had the same hand. It had the same taste of a man who thought ink made him taller. "We require your compliance. The man at the gardens will not make himself known to a lady. He will speak to the girl who served. Bring the portrait, or be named what you are in every corner of London where you would eat again. Do not feign ignorance. We saw your curtsy. We saw him pleased to talk. If you do not come, your name will be printed." Vauxhall wore its lanterns like a necklace. The paths glowed with a soft intention that made even the gravel seem well-mannered. Helena came to the gate at the 3rd hour after twilight, cloak fastened high at her throat, hat set low. She had put on the dress with the mended hem because she owned no better, and because it would have been a lie to pretend otherwise. She told herself she would walk through the garden, drink water, stand under a lantern, and be seen by many. She would not be led down a dark walk. She would not meet a man who remained only a voice. She would turn back if the path narrowed. The clerk at the gate barely looked up as she paid the small coin Mrs. Betts had pressed into her hand. Music drifted from the orchestra stand as if the night itself had learned to bow. Couples moved in polite circles, each set of steps a compromise between pleasure and propriety. Helena kept to the edge where gentlemen's laughter did not require a reply. The note had said the Chinese pavilion, where the lanterns hung low. She could see it from the terrace. A fanciful roofline and panels painted with imagined gardens. She wove toward it, thinking with every step of the risk, thinking too that refusing to come had its own. If she stayed away, the man behind the printing ink would not lose interest. He would grow it. If she came, she could stand in a place where public eyes worked like a guard. She reached the pavilion and set herself not inside it but near, where the lanterns reached their soft bells to the path. She folded her hands. She breathed. She watched the people who tried not to stare at anyone who might be known and who failed politely. She tried to think of chalk and quills. She tried not to think of a small oval space on a Marchmont mantel. A gentleman stepped out from a line of lilac shrubs. He did not come as a threat does. He came as a decision. Helena recognized the ease of his shoulders before she recognized the man. She felt her ribs loosen as if laces had been cut, and then tighten because everything had just become more complicated. "Your Highness," she said without bowing, because a bow would draw attention. "Miss Helena," he said, and the use of her given name felt like a candle cupped in a careful hand. "May I walk with you a very little way? You should not be seen with me. I find that I already am. Perhaps the damage is done. Perhaps the cure is to behave as if nothing is amiss." She wanted to smile at that. She did not. She let the smallest ghost of a smile touch her mouth and be gone. "Very well, sir. A very little way." They fell into step on the path that circled the pavilion. The lanterns swayed as if the night had a breath of its own. Voices tinseled around them. A child laughed somewhere, the clear drop of it cutting through the murmur. The orchestra changed a tune, and the crowd reshaped itself. They walked like two people who had met to speak of weather and meant much more. "I had a note," Helena said. "I suspected you might. This morning's sheet had the look of bait worked out on a table the night before. It named a time and a place. It named a price. It asked for a thing I have never touched. It threatened my name." He inclined his head. "Names are the easiest currency for men who cannot keep accounts straight any other way." They rounded the corner of the pavilion. A pair of gentlemen moved aside with the polite stiffness of those who believe they own the path and are practiced in yielding it. Helena kept her eyes on the gravel. She counted the stones. She said what she had come to say without making it sound like a confession. "A second note was sewn into my hem." He looked down. He did not stare at her hem. He respected a woman's dignity as naturally as other men forgot it. He looked at the gravel and spoke as if they were discussing the price of candles. "The stitching on the wax of the first note," he said. "I saw it. I wondered at it." "Mrs. Betts mended the dress yesterday," Helena said. "The canvas left a pattern on the wax when it was pressed. Whoever tried to make a seal used the wrong tool. A clumsy messenger then, or a careful one with poor materials." He was quiet. Then he said, "I am relieved you did not come to this place unaccompanied. I did come unaccompanied." He let the truth stand between them for a breath, and then refused to allow it a victory. "Then I am relieved I came at all." They paused near a hedge cut into a formal arch. A stream of people passed through it like thread through a needle. Helena watched them and saw nothing dangerous. She felt danger anyway, because danger is sometimes only the shadow made by a debt that has not yet come due. "You mustn't be seen to speak with me," she said. "The sheet will make a story out of our shadows." "It will," he said. "And yet the story can be made to say other things if the audience sees us in the right light." "What things?" "That a man has not lost his balance, that a woman is not being dragged, that a prince is capable of enjoying music and conversation in a public place without setting the city afire." "You make it sound simple." "Nothing is simple that has ever mattered." They moved again. The path took them along a row of supper boxes, where families ate cold chickens and compared notes on friends seen or unseen. A lady bowed. Adrian returned the bow with such exactness that Helena felt steadied by the geometry of it. "Helena," he asked, "have you told anyone else of the notes?" "Mrs. Betts." "Lady Eugenia knows there is trouble, not its shape." "And Lord Ashbury?" "He knows of the missing piece. He knows how to say simplicity in a way that makes a woman feel part of a cupboard. That is very like him. Your Highness has observed him carefully. There are men one is instructed to admire. One looks again just to be sure the instruction is not flawed." They turned down a smaller path to avoid a cluster of laughing young men who were too merry to notice whom they jostled. The smaller path was not dark, but its lanterns had grown farther apart, as if the night had asked for more say in the arrangement. Helena kept to the piece of ground where the light fell. Adrian adjusted his step to match hers. "You have the note?" he asked. "Yes, may I see it?" She hesitated. The paper in her glove was a stain she could not wash away by herself. It might be something else in his hand, a tool, or at least a thing held safely. She drew it out and angled it so the lantern caught the words. He did not take it from her. He read as one reads a letter over a shoulder. "The hand is practiced," he said, "but the threats are not practiced enough. See how it promises to print your name. It believes you cannot bear to see it in ink. It does not understand that a woman who works can bear more than a man who writes. It thinks, I will run like a hare to wherever it whistles. Will you run? No. Good. They stood in that agreement for a moment that felt like a plank laid over water. Then he drew her attention to the ground, to a scrap of blue tucked against a root. He bent, a man retrieving a handkerchief he himself had dropped. He used his body to shield the movement. He picked up the ribbon the way one lifts a fragile thing from a child's hand. The ribbon was rich as a nobleman's idea of modesty. A small bead of wax clung to the end. The wax had caught an impression cleanly. Do you see? He said in a voice that belonged at a writing desk. Not here. The seal sits like a man who thinks the chair was made for him. That crest is Lord Ashbury's. Helena felt a branch in her mind split into two. On one branch grew relief. There was a name and not just a fog. On the other grew the knowledge that names carried power the way nettles carry sting. Someone could have taken his seal, she said. A messenger, a clerk. Someone could have. But a clerk does not often choose to parade a seal's mark in places where a prince takes his heir. A clerk hides Helena. A lord believes he cannot be seen even when he stands on a table. A family passed, the mother holding her daughter's hand as if to remind both of them which world was which. Helena tucked the ribbon and wax beneath the edge of her cloak. Adrian's hand brushed hers for the smallest portion of a second. It was nothing that could be described at breakfast. It was enough for her pulse to set a new measure. We should give this to Mr. Penworth, he said. He has a better memory for coats of arms than I do. Mr. Penworth is here? I did not bring him to parade, but he is never far. He is a ghost who knows how to pay for entry. They took 3 steps and saw, without planning it, the figure of a steward approaching, with the weary smile of a man tasked with making inconveniences palatable. He bowed to Adrian and inclined his head to Helena as if she were a guest of an unknown sort, whom he had chosen to honor rather than expose. Your Highness, he said, pray forgive my interruption. There is a gentleman who begs a moment of your consideration, and a lady's. He assures me it is an error he wishes to correct before it grows. He has engaged a private room and requests our presence to spare the public any needless agitation. Adrian's face did not change. He became rather more himself. We do not require a private room, he said. We require witnesses, and if there is an error, we require it to be corrected in the company of those who do the garden's counting. The steward nodded, relieved. I thought you might prefer propriety. Will you walk with me then? The manager will meet us in the little office where the tickets are reckoned. Helena bowed her head slightly, grateful to have a destination that was not a dark enclosure where a voice could press a woman back with the excuse of gentle manners. They followed the steward through a path that smelt faintly of damp leaves and sugared almonds. A light rain had come and gone earlier, and the gravel had hardened into its best behavior. The office was a neat little box with a table for coin and a ledger that had learned how to tell the truth when asked. The garden's manager stood inside, a man whose jacket fit him because numbers had tailored him. He bowed to Adrian and to Helena in the exact measure the steward had set. He admired the balance. Thank you for your respect, Adrian said. Before we begin, may I present Mr. Penworth? Penworth appeared with the quietness of a thought occurring at the right time. He took no more room than a coat hung on a peg, and somehow less. He posted himself behind Adrian's shoulder, his eyes politely noticing everything. The gentleman who had begged consideration arrived next. He was not Lord Ashbury. He was smoother by half and shorter by a head, with the air of a man who wears another's importance for an evening to see how it suits him. He introduced himself as Mr. Gerald, secretary to Lord Ashbury's man of business. Your Highness, he said, bowing sufficiently. Madam, a trifle has gone missing in a house you honor with your notice. A miniature, not of any monetary weight but of family feeling. A misunderstanding may have led to its misplacement. A witness remarked a maid near the mantel at a certain hour, and we are all prey to our minds making stories of shadows, are we not? We are, Adrian said. What do you ask? Only that the lady here would tell us whether she saw any hand near the mantel, or whether, perhaps in the press of her duties, she moved an object and placed it elsewhere with every good intention. Helena stood very straight. She had expected to be asked this question. She had not expected to have it put so neatly on a plate and garnished with politeness. She looked at the manager, not the secretary, and answered the ledger more than the man. I poured tea. I saw an empty hook after the fact. I held no miniature. I moved nothing from the mantel to any other place. The manager made a neat little sound with his pen and set it to paper, not for record, but to show that words create lines which one can follow back if the road is lost. Mr. Gerald smiled as men do when they have a second plan. He produced a folded page, not an official one, but with a magistrate's name in the heading and a signature that could belong to anyone accustomed to signing many things. It was not a warrant. It was a suggestion writ with ink's swagger. You see, he said, the magistrate, in his zeal to keep neighborhood sweet, has written that should the little portrait be found in the keeping of a servant not her own, restitution and apology might suffice in place of public complaint. No need to involve the city's attention. No need to distress a household already shaken. If the lady would be so good as to consent to a brief search of her cloak, the misunderstanding might evaporate like mist in sun. Adrian's expression did not alter in anger. He did not need it. He had reserves other men do not. He addressed the steward. Who has authority in this small room? I do, sir, the manager said modestly. Then let us seat ourselves as if we were all equal for a moment, and be so. Mr. Gerald, you will take a chair. Miss Helena, you will remain standing if you prefer it. I will stand as well. Mr. Penworth, if you please. They arranged themselves with the odd comfort that order gives even to those who are about to be made uncomfortable by it. Helena did not remove her cloak. She did not need to. The ribbon and wax lay beneath it in Adrian's inner pocket now, for he had slipped it away, as a man puts a folded map where he can find it in a storm. She held her hands and let them be hands that had poured tea without spilling. Mr. Gerald tried again, choosing a note that pretended to be low, but could not help striking the ear too cleanly. There is a certain trick the city plays on those who work in it, madam. It tells them their reputations are small enough to fold. That makes them careless. They forget the first and best thing the city can do for them is to keep their names out of the paper. I am trying to keep yours out. Helena looked at Adrian. He did not look back because he did not need to. He had already chosen his stance. Now he held it as one holds posture in a dance one means to finish. Mr. Gerald, Adrian said, your concern for a working woman's name would move me if it did not come smelling of last night's lamp. I recommend another path. We will show you a proof. You will take it away and consider whether it is air or iron. If you find it iron, you will trouble the magistrate no further in the matter of Miss Helena. If you find it air, you will trouble him no more anyway, for I will make it a draught to blow your candle out. Penworth placed the ribbon and its attached drop of wax on the table, with the gravity of a sacristan laying down a relic. The manager leaned in. He had a memory for marks, too. He did not need to announce it. He made a thoughtful sound, low in his throat. Mr. Gerald went still, only in his mouth. His hand wanted to swoop, it did not dare. This is found on the grounds, Adrian said. The seal's imprint is Lord Ashbury's. If your next question is how the impression reached the ribbon, you may ask it of Lord Ashbury. You may ask also why his man of business sends a clerk to a gentleman's garden with language that threatens a woman's livelihood. Ask him that, and ask him why he thinks the city so in his pocket that he can shake it and hear only coins. Mr. Gerald tried to laugh. What came out was thinner than he intended. He regained himself and offered a bow with more spine than one would expect of a secretary. Your Highness, I am sure there is a rational account for everything. You have my assurance I will convey your questions. Convey them and carry back the answers, Adrian said. The steward's relief was a living thing now, as sharp as the scent of new rain. The manager tapped his pen twice, a man sealing his own little ledger of the soul. Helena felt the tight band around her chest give a notch. They might have left the matter there for the night if the garden had allowed it. But the garden was a place built for display, and display invites spectators, and spectators bring an appetite. The steward excused himself to quiet a pair of young men whose mirth had begun to bruise the furniture. He returned sooner than his face suggested he wished. His careful smile had cracked and been mended. Your Highness, he said, choosing each word as if it sat upon a scale, the magistrate is in the garden this evening, and he is prepared to hear the matter at once unless a private accommodation is reached, and Lord Ashbury himself is said to be waiting in a nearby supper box. The steward's careful announcement washed over the little office and made everything sharper. Helena felt the moment choose between shadow and daylight. Adrian did not hesitate. He turned to the manager with courtesy that also did not ask permission. "We will not go to a supper box," he said. "We will not go anywhere that confuses leisure with judgment. You will kindly procure a room where accounts are kept and honest work is done. We will ask those with the right to count to bear witness. We will not permit the city to say we crept away to arrange something that cannot stand in open air." The manager bowed with relief you could have measured. "I have just such a room, sir, this way." They threaded through a short passage that smelled of paper and clean ink. The room the manager chose had a long table and 2 chairs, and a high window with rain marks that told a truth about weather the garden lanterns did not bother to tell. There were ledgers in a neat stack and a box for ticket stubs. Numbers had lived here for years. They had made the room honest by habit. The manager set a chair for Adrian, because that is what one does for princes. Adrian nodded and did not sit. "We will stand," he said. "If anyone sits, it will be Miss Helena, and only if she wishes." Helena wished to stand. Her legs wanted to feel the ground. She folded her hands and let them rest one upon the other in the way that had steadied cups in difficult rooms. Mr. Penworth entered without show, as if the room had been made with a Penworth-shaped space in it. He took up his place beside the door and made the hinges feel like old friends. The steward, a fairer man now that he had a plan, murmured something to a runner and sent him toward the entrance with a message. "Lord Ashbury will be invited to speak where the ledgers are," the manager said. "It is the best courtesy I can offer all parties." "Thank you," Adrian said. "And Mr. Manager, we will need another witness, a woman who knows this maid's work and has no interest in pleasing men over truth. There is such a one." The steward's runner was quick enough to make one believe in a world that can move well when it chooses. Mrs. Betts came into the room 3 minutes later with her apron straight, her hair pulled back, and her eyes saying that she had been carried from the far side of a kitchen and kept her dignity in motion. She curtsied to Adrian the way a sensible woman curtsies to a man who is what he says he is. She nodded to the manager. She positioned herself slightly behind Helena's shoulder, as if her role were to keep the young woman from being stolen by a draft. "You asked for me," she said, the words both statement and readiness. Adrian inclined his head. "Thank you for coming in such haste. We wish to set a small matter before witnesses. Speak only what you know. Speak all of what you know." Mrs. Betts's mouth quirked, as if she approved of this instruction being given to all, not just to her. She folded her hands and waited. Lord Ashbury did not keep them long. He entered with that quiet mastery that comes from never needing to ask where a room is. He marked the long table, the ledgers, the high window. He marked the manager, the steward, Penworth. His eyes skipped over Helena and then returned to fix upon her for one breath. He bowed to the prince in a measure exact enough to be respectful and yet not quite free of suggestion. "Your Highness," he said smoothly, "thank you for allowing me to assist in the mending of a small rent in the evening's fabric. A trifle has gone astray, and already a world is woven out of it. Let us unweave with care." "Let us," Adrian said. "Begin where you wish." Ashbury touched the edge of the ledger as if to salute its seriousness. A miniature in the Marchmont house is missing. It is not valuable to anyone not named Marchmont. There was confusion last night, for which the family is very sorry. A servant was present, where perhaps a servant should not have had to be present. We are all bound to be made foolish by the circumstances. Nonetheless, a witness saw a maid near the mantel, and the mantel had recently been full, where it now is not. Helena spoke before the line of suggestion could ring around the room and make a circle of itself. "I poured tea. I did not handle any portrait." A gentleman might have made her voice sound sharp by interrupting her. Adrian did not. He took her words and set them like a stone on the table, to keep the ledger from blowing in a draught. "The maid states she did not handle any portrait," he said. "Mr. Manager, please make note. Miss Helena Hart says she poured tea and did not touch the miniature." The manager's pen set it down obediently, the nib a small anchor. Ashbury's smile grew less. He did not imagine that a prince would turn a servant's sentence into record. He did not let his surprise reach the corners of his mouth. He had other corners to attend to. "A man of business," he said, "not mine, but a friend's," spoke to the garden steward. "He tells me the magistrate is within earshot. I myself sought to keep this matter between friends. But if we must bring the law to the table, let us allow it to do its work quickly and with a minimum of embarrassment." "Mr. Penworth," Adrian said mildly. "What say you to Mr. Gerald's style of friendship?" Penworth did not look at Ashbury. He did not look at anyone, and yet made each person feel as if he had taken their measure in the same amount of time. He held up the ribbon and the wax he had earlier placed on the ledger table. "I found this near the Chinese pavilion," he said, and by found I mean His Highness had eyes to see it and fingers to rescue it without spectacle. "The wax bears a sign, sir. The sign is that of Lord Ashbury. The wax clings to a ribbon that would have been at home upon a fine object, worn at a throat or hung from a fastening." Ashbury's eyes did a small, involuntary thing then. He brought them back at once to the expression they had agreed with his face to wear. "Wax is a common creature," he said lightly. "It sticks in foolish places." Mrs. Betts lifted her chin by half a degree. "A hem is also a creature, my lord. It does not usually press its pattern into wax, unless it has been made to play a part in a story too clever for its own good." Ashbury turned his attention to her with courtesy that had been honed on harder wheels than kitchen floors. "And you are?" "The housekeeper," she said, in the tone of one who signs for a delivery and knows she has the right to do so. Adrian spoke before Ashbury could tempt the conversation into admiring itself. "There is more," he said. "Miss Helena, show the first note." Helena hesitated only because paper made inkwell sneers on the faintest accusation. But hiding proofs feeds them. She drew the folded scrap from the glove where she had kept it safe from damp and fear. She unfolded it, placed it on the table, and did not try to straighten its willful curl. The manager leaned to read. The steward did not read, but looked at the last line with the training of a man who must sometimes report the heart of a thing to a superior who does not like too many words. "Bring the small portrait from the Marchmont mantelpiece," the steward summoned quietly. "You are seen. The portrait buys your safety." The phrase made a small weather in the room. It moved over faces and left a dry path. Helena said, "I received a second message sewn into the lining of my hem. It said more plainly that my name would be printed if I did not bring the portrait to this place. It called me girl. It was put in my garment so that I would find it too late to do anything but obey. Mrs. Betts's eyes sharpened. I did not sew any such thing into your dress. I mended the hem with canvas and thread. The printing men have nimble fingers when they think a tale will jump if they tug the right string. They tugged you. They hope to tug us all," Lord Ashbury said as if giving a gentle sermon. "The city grows fat on innuendo. It is ugly, and I detest it. But it is not my quill that scrawled this. It is not my habit to threaten servants. It is my habit to rescue ladies from distress." "Will you rescue this one?" Adrian asked blandly. Ashbury weighed the room, found it heavier than he would like, and set his tone as if he were offering a compromise so reasonable only a fool would reject it. "I will suggest that if the miniature appears unharmed within the next day, no question will be asked of any maid or footman. The Marchmonts wish only their private peace. If Miss Helena has been used by others to shuttle this trifling object from mantle to hand, let her say so now, and I will myself assure she is spared any ugliness. There are moments when a woman can feel her life set down like a plate for inspection. Helena felt it now. The offer made her appear the sort of creature a gentleman could pass a hand over to find the smuggled thing. The offer protected a house and did it by building a shelter with one girl's name. She tried not to think about fairness. Fairness is a strange fellow who drinks too much and falls asleep at his post. She thought instead of accuracy. Accuracy unknots ropes. "I cannot return a thing I have never taken," she said. "I cannot name a hand I have never seen. I can only say I poured tea and watched a space where a portrait was not, and received a note that assumed I would serve the writer better than I serve the house. That is my truth." Ashbury's smile began to grow teeth. He opened his mouth to ladle out something that would sound like mercy and taste like binding cloth. He did not get the chance. A rustle at the door announced Lady Eugenia Marchmont. She came into the room with her hair in a more honest disarray than fashion would recommend. Her gloves were in her hand, not on it. Her dignity was intact because it was built on usefulness, not the opinion of those who watch. "Your Highness," she said, pale and steady, "I beg leave to speak. I was told my house has wandered outside its own fences and must be shown the way back." Adrian inclined his head. "Please, Lady Eugenia, speak plainly here. You will not be misquoted in this room." She breathed once as if diving into cold water. "Last night was a knot, My daughter is a foolish girl and I love her. I love her enough to say so in front of others. She had written letters she ought not to have written, and a cousin who ought to have stopped their travelling pressed them onward instead. I sent Helena with the tea to keep His Highness from a sharper rudeness, while I fetched my child from the foolishness of her window and made her burn paper. Helena did not pretend to be anything but a servant. We asked too much of her good sense and her composure. Then we asked silence besides. That was my fault. I own it. Her voice had no tremor when she said fault. It had a grace that gives on the day it must. The manager wrote with quiet speed, as a man writes the details that will tip a scale that ought to have tipped earlier. Lady Eugenia went on. The miniature had been in the gallery that morning. I saw it there. I have no idea who took it in the evening. I did not make a plan to trade it for anything. I did not invite a Lord Secretary to frighten a maid with ink. I believe such behavior is beneath my house, and beneath the men who make fortunes pretending to clean the city's windows by pointing out its smears. Her eyes flicked briefly to Ashbury's face, and then away again, as if touching a stove she had known would be hot. She turned to Helena, and the way she said the maid's name was not a performance for the room. It was a line drawn between two women across a space that had held unfairness and now must hold amends. Helena, I ought never to have placed you where you could be named by men who do not bother to separate skill from presumption. I apologize for asking you to hold my house together with your body. I ask your pardon. The words laid themselves on the room like a cloth smoothed over a table. They did not erase the marks beneath. They covered them with decency. Helena felt herself stand a fraction taller. She did not look at Ashbury when she answered. She kept her eyes on the woman who had used her, and then remembered she was a person. I forgive you, my lady. I ask in return that my name be kept when it does not serve truth to spend it. It shall be kept, Lady Eugenia said, as much as any woman can keep anything in this city. I will make calls where I must. Ashbury saw the tide set against him and made a dainty attempt to sail along as if it had always been his intention to land where the others stood. I too am relieved, he said, that we may end the matter without involving the magistrate. No one wishes his leisure to be soured by rumours making a supper out of air. He looked toward the door with a composed expression, as if he expected the magistrate to lean in and agree with his moderation. No magistrate appeared. The steward had been diligent in his errand, and had directed the man elsewhere with a firmness that sounded like deference from a distance. Adrian waited until the room had found its breath. Then he spoke as one speaks before a hearth with a small child asleep in the other room, mindful of closeness and consequence. We will not end the matter by giving it to forgetfulness, he said. We will end it by setting down what is true and refusing what is not. Let the garden's manager hold the notes in his ledger drawer under his key. Let Mr. Penworth keep the ribbon and wax and deliver a copy of the impression to the constable at Bow Street, with a memorandum that does not accuse, but remembers. Let Lady Eugenia record in her own hand the reason Helena poured tea last night, instead of the mistress or the daughter. And let me do this. He stepped a fraction closer to Helena, not enough to crowd, enough to be where a person can hear a person without the rest of the world eavesdropping. Miss Helena, he said, I cannot promise to unprint anything that has already been set. I cannot unmake men who enjoy seeing their names next to other people's misfortune. I cannot keep your path entirely free of stones. But I can give you my word before these witnesses that I will not permit your name to be the cost of my convenience. If there is to be discomfort, I will bear it first. If there must be talk, let it be of a prince who made his life untidy, rather than of a maid who did her duty. I ask for your trust. I do not ask for your hand. I ask only that you let my decision stand beside you for as long as it takes this storm to tire. He did not kneel. He did not make a display. He presented himself as a man places a book upon a table and opens it to the right page and steps back, inviting the other to read and decide. Helena's breath went in and did not rush out. In that small suspension, she felt the weight she had been carrying tilt. Not fall. Tilt. Enough to allow her shoulders a fraction of new shape. She could look at him now without needing to protect him from her gaze. She could look and see a man who had chosen a line and meant to walk it, even if it made his fine boots dusty. You risk something, she said, not to make him noble, but to make the arithmetic clear. One hopes to risk the right things, he replied. Then, she said, you have my trust. I have little to give, but I have that. Penworth did not look moved. He looked like a man who had decided a problem and would now carry the answer to the place it needed to be. The manager breathed in and placed his pen down the way a man lays aside a tool at the end of the day. The steward's shoulders went lower by a very polite fraction. Ashbury adjusted his gloves, although they did not need adjusting. He bowed again and did not depart, because to do so too swiftly would declare that he had been chased. He had not. He had simply not been permitted to sit at the head of the table he had arranged for himself. Lady Eugenia turned to the manager. "Sir, may we rely upon you to prevent the staff from being waylaid by those who like to collect phrases where they can purchase them cheapest?" "You may," the manager said. "My ticket takers are better doormen than they appear. They know how to say no with a smile that gives nothing away." Mrs. Betts touched Helena's elbow briefly, a pressure that said, Here is a person, you are not alone." She cleared her throat. "If I may," she said, "it would be best if we made our way home by a route that does not invite company, and if I sent Miss Helena up the back stairs to bed like any other night. The less novelty we feed the city, the less it will expect of us." Adrian approved this plan with a nod. He shifted so that his body created a little corridor for Helena to pass through the room, without anyone needing to step aside too much. It was a tender kind of logistics that security men learn, and princes too seldom practice. Helena stepped into the space he made, and felt how ease can be built like that, not talked about but constructed out of inches. As they moved to go, the steward returned with a final word. He held a card between two fingers, not like a summons, but like a receipt. "The magistrate sends his regards," he said, choosing a neutral word and making it gentler. "He says he is needed elsewhere, and believes this garden's house keeps itself in good order when it chooses to. He asks to be informed tomorrow if anything truly legal needs his attention." Ashbury accepted that with a smile that said he had not been sent for and had not been refused. He had been neither, which is a kind of defeat that looks like a bow. Adrian turned at the threshold of the ledger room. He addressed all of them, but he looked at Helena. "Thank you," he said simply. She did not say you are welcome because it was not servitude she wished to acknowledge. She said with equal simplicity, "Good night, sir." The night took them back. The garden had not noticed the little storm except to learn a better way to lay down its gravel. Lanterns swung and were pleased with their own reflections in the puddles. Couples stepped their measures and believed they were writing history with their feet. Perhaps they were in their houses, in their quiet ways. Helena walked with Mrs. Betts to the gate, not too close to the prince, and not so far that she pretended she did not know how to claim the space he had given. They passed a group of young men who looked up to laughter as a kind of sport. The men glanced and saw nothing they could eat with their eyes. The women in the group glanced and saw a maid with an older woman who would not drop her charge. They looked away and thought of their own maids and what they might owe them without having known. At the corner, Mr. Penworth separated from the air and became a person again. "Your coach waits at the far gate, sir," he said. "There is no crowd there. I have seen to it that a lost hat will take more attention than a prince leaving by foot." Adrian offered his arm in no one's direction and in everyone's. Lady Eugenia, who had chosen to walk behind and re-enter the world near the coach, like a woman managing the overlap of dignity and haste, took it. They moved on. Mrs. Betts touched Helena's sleeve once more. "We will go by the cabman's line and then across the little square," she said. "Keep your eyes on my basket. Think about bread and yeast. Think about whether we need lemon peel tomorrow. Do not think about anyone's eyes." Helena obeyed. She counted the shops they passed. She named the trades in her head: cobbler, cheesemonger, haberdasher, with a window full of buttons that looked like soldiers. She let the city shrink back to useful size. When they reached the Marchmont house, the hall was quiet in that way a house can contrive when it chooses not to remember what made it noisy. The footman took their wraps as he would have taken wraps any other night. He did not ask. He did not tell his face to make a story. Lady Eugenia stood in the entry for a moment, as if remembering how to be mistress in her own door. Then she looked at Helena and did a braver thing than most would think brave. "Thank you," she said again, but not the kind of thank you that tries to pay a debt with a coin of politeness, the kind that sets an account where two people can see it and agree that it exists and that it must not be added to without consent. Helena curtsied. She went to the back stairs because that was where her day normally ended. She climbed with the measured tread that kept boards from complaining. At the landing, she paused and touched the hem that had scratched her ankle earlier. It lay smooth now. The messages had been pulled from it. The canvas remained. It would continue to scratch, but only as a reminder of mending done in care, not of a trap stitched in by a stranger's order. In the still room later, Mrs. Betts set the kettle on as if it were any winter night. She poured water over leaves and let the steam do what steam does. Helena sat on the stool and let her hands lie open in her lap. "It is not over," Mrs. Betts said, "not to frighten, but to prevent false sleep." "No," Helena said, "it is not over, but I will sleep closer to honest tonight than last." Mrs. Betts nodded. She pressed a cup into Helena's hands. It warmed her fingers and then her chest. The house creaked a little and then settled. Somewhere in the city, ink dried on a plate that would not be used. Somewhere a ribbon lay in a drawer beside a neat note in a manager's hand. Somewhere a prince sat with his own thoughts and made peace with a decision that would change the angle of his days. Somewhere a lord's smile cracked where no one could see. Somewhere a woman put her foolish letters into a fire and watched them curl, and learned something she would not say aloud for years. Helena finished her tea. She stood. She went to bed. The street outside sighed once and grew quiet, as if London too had chosen for 1 hour to set down its busyness and do nothing more than let a good choice rest. Morning arrived washed and plain, the way a good tablecloth arrives and makes a rough table fit to eat at. The Marchmont house had already chosen its mood, sober, tidy, determined to act as if households always resolved their business in daylight. The servants moved with the careful haste of people who know a room will fill and wish for once to be invisible, for their own comfort and not someone else's. Helena was sent to the still room first, not because there was anything to boil there, but because Mrs. Betts understood that a woman needs 1 square of quiet before a roomful of eyes begins their work. She sat and held her cup. The tea steamed. She did not drink. She felt the city awakening around them, a little rougher today to her ear, as if its many streets had not slept enough and were rubbing their eyes too. When the bell rang, she and Mrs. Betts went up together by the back stairs and stood outside the door to the morning room until a footman inclined his head. Inside, the company had arranged itself into propriety. The manager from the gardens sat near the fireplace. Mr. Penworth took a place near the window, where he could see and not be seen. Lady Eugenia stood at the writing table with a quill ready, though she did not yet write. Lord Ashbury had come early and made himself comfortable in that way which looks like deference and produces the effect of occupation. Adrian stood. He would not sit where others had to stand to speak to him. Helena came in and stopped at the edge of the carpet. She would not cross onto wool without being asked. Adrian turned to her with something like mourning in his eyes, not sleepiness, but plainness. "Good day, Miss Helena," he said. "Good day, sir," she answered, and felt the whole room hear that the word sir had a fondness inside it, not servility. The manager greeted Lady Eugenia with a bow that belonged to books. "I come to witness as asked," he said. "I have brought an envelope. I believe it to be of use." He set the long envelope on the table. It had the casual neatness of a man's pockets when a wife sees to them. He opened it with a small sigh that sounded like a ledger when it is balanced. Out came the ribbon and the wax, already known to them. Out came a copy of a short record stating when and how it had been found. And, to everyone's surprise except perhaps his own, out came a second small bundle tied with string. "The garden's attendants found this under a bench near the Chinese pavilion when we'd hardly left the room last night," he said. "A boy brought it to me because it looked like something a lady would not want the night to chew. I did not open it. I put a piece of paper around it and wrote where it was found and by whom. Then I locked it in my drawer. I do not have a right to decide what it means. I have a right to decide it is not mine." He untied the string, laid the paper back. Inside lay the miniature, its painted face looking up with that extraordinary frankness portraits sometimes acquire when they have been the subject of too many words. The ribbon end showed the break where wax had once held fast. Lady Eugenia made a sound in her throat that was not a cry and not a laugh. It was the sound a mother makes when something she had put out of her mind as lost reappears, and she cannot quite bless it, because its vanishing taught her too much truth about herself. Helena stayed still. She looked not at the portrait, but at the way rope marks linger on a wrist after a knot is undone. The family's breath moved through the room and learned itself again. Lord Ashbury lifted his head. "Well," he said lightly, "relief comes in strange bundles, does it not? How fortunate that the thing has chosen to return to us of its own will." Adrian did not accept this at all. He lifted the minute painting with a care that could not be faked, its ribbon trailing. He let the light find the glimmer of wax left on the edge. "Fortunate," he repeated, "not for ourselves alone. Fortunate that the garden's house keeps better ledgers than the city's gossip. Fortunate, too, that this small object cannot testify to who hung it about a neck last and who tucked it under a bench to be found. It makes me think a question must be asked elsewhere." Ashbury's smile grew finer. "To whom do you propose to address such a question, Your Highness? The bench? The boy? It is dangerous to put a house's peace to the hazard of children's recollections." His voice held nothing that could be grasped and everything that could be felt. It would have made a person feel foolish for wanting to insist upon accountability if the person had been less certain of their line. "Mr. Penworth," Adrian said without moving his eyes from Ashbury's, "where did you search last night before you returned to me?" Penworth did not humiliate the morning with drama. "I visited Lord Ashbury's coach for the second time, sir. I asked his coachman, who is a neat fellow. A neat fellow keeps a neat box. There was a lacquered case with a lift-off lid. It held gloves at first looking and something beneath at second. The something was not the miniature. It was a card case with space enough for one. The pattern of dust suggested something had lain there recently and been lifted." Ashbury's laugh now carried a larger shape. "Mr. Penworth has a talent for embroidery. We must find him a pattern to suit." Helena did not speak, though she wanted to. The resolve had been set the previous night. They would gather what was solid and stand upon it. She folded her fingers, and Mrs. Betts, who had entered with her and taken her place near the door, tilted her head the least amount, as if to remind her that stones, not feathers, build a good bridge. The manager came to the rescue without meaning to play hero. "As a matter of habit," he said, "I made my own small inquiry before coming here. When a gentleman of a certain bearing uses one of our rooms briskly and leaves it more briskly still, the attendants notice. They say a valet, not Mr. Penworth met a certain lord's coachman last night near the exit and passed a small parcel to a boy to deliver to the front gate. The boy feared being caught and left the parcel under a bench rather than walk farther into the light. I do not accuse. I only repeat what two men said to me when I asked them whether the garden had made an error it must prevent another time." Silence poured out like clean water. Ashbury's hands adjusted his cuff. Lady Eugenia did not scold. Scolding massacres truth with noise. She stood with every line of her body devoted to the business of setting a house to rights. Adrian returned the miniature to the table, not to Lady Eugenia's hand. He did not want to make it a prize. He wanted to make it a fact. Then he looked squarely at Ashbury as if the two of them had once met in a corridor where either could have stepped aside and neither had, and here they were at the end of it. "My lord," he said, "you have a gift for making arrangements look like mercy. I do not possess such a gift. I have something simpler. I have a witness who saw the impression of your seal where it did not belong. I have a ribbon with that impression clinging. I have a garden manager with better habits than most men. I have a housekeeper who knows the difference between a hem and a trap. I have a lady who has made error and owned it. I have a maid who has been threatened and has not lied. I have enough to ask you to withdraw from the position you are holding today. Not to withdraw from society, not from friendship, not from dinners, though I suspect dinners will decline to seek you for a season, but to withdraw from the business of arranging other people's futures with your own name stamped on the seal." Ashbury bowed. He had to. His neck knew how. It was a better bow than last night. It came from a place that recognized a room had drawn a circle around him, and that he could not bustle past it without tearing his own coat. "If my zeal to be of use made me seem to overreach," he said, "then I regret the overreach. I especially regret anyone's distress. You will allow me, Your Highness, to say that my only wish was to restore peace by the speediest route. I see now that speed cannot be asked to do two kinds of work." "You may say it," Adrian replied, "and you may keep away from this house for a time that will give your friends leisure to remember you for happier conduct. If gossip invites you to explain what happened here, be clever and decline. If men flatter your sense of solutions, ask them to fetch their own gloves. It was kindly said. It was final. Ashbury allowed himself the dignity of not contesting. He turned to Lady Eugenia, and for once he spoke without silk. "Madam, forgive any portion of my actions that worsened your trouble." "We will speak later, my lord," Lady Eugenia said, not with ice, but with that severe temperance one uses with a neighbour who has too much practice in stepping over hedges. He bowed once more and left, his name shrinking behind him the way winter light shrinks in a room when the candle is set right and the wick trimmed. No one in the room grew taller for his departure. They simply returned to their proper heights. Lady Eugenia moved then with brisk mercy. She reached for the miniature and kissed it quickly, ridiculous and human, then set it back again, ashamed of the kiss in front of others, only because it ruined the neatness of the moment. "I will send a note to the paper that printed the little suggestion about me and mine," she said, "and I will have the note delivered by a woman who can explain a tone. I will speak to my daughter. I will thank the gardens people by sending a basket not too large. I will ask my cousin not to darken my doorstep until he learns how to keep letters in their places. And I will do one thing more." She turned to Helena. She did it without show. She took Helena's hands, too work-rough and too fine all at once. "You belong in this house as long as you wish to," she said. "You are more than your quietness. You are the reason this house did not turn its back on itself. If you ever wish to leave, you will leave with wages paid up and a letter longer than is fashionable. If you wish to stay, you will be treated like the spine of a book, not the ribbon that falls out when the cover is shaken." Mrs. Betts swallowed. Her eyes were not wet, but they were tender. It was as much a compliment to her as to Helena, meant that her training had made this possible. Helena did not look at anyone's eyes for a moment, for fear her gratitude would break out and make a scene bigger than the room could handle. "Thank you, my lady," she said, and her voice did not tremble, because humble things can be the strongest when they know what they are. Adrian turned then, as if the next sentence had been waited for patiently all morning, and would not behave if asked to wait any longer. "Lady Eugenia," he said, "to your daughter we owe privacy. To your staff we owe respect. To Miss Helena I owe something else, and I cannot pay it in silence. I ask your leave to speak where everyone can hear, and with nothing drafted out of sight." Lady Eugenia looked with a quick flicker toward the door, as if the Prince Regent himself might be leaning there with a raised brow. He was not. The moment belonged to modest people. She dipped her head. "If it must be said, say it here." Adrian stepped nearer to Helena, as close as propriety could bear in a morning room with witnesses and ledgers, and last night's smoke faint on the air. He did not reach for her hands. They were already in the possession of another woman's apology. He kept his own at his sides because youth sometimes believes love needs a gesture, and he had lived long enough to know love is often braver when it stands. "Miss Helena Hart," he said, "you have met me on 2 unlikely evenings and corrected the shape of both. You have shown me a courage that works without being asked to be called by that name. You have, by simply being accurate, kept me from becoming a story written by someone else's hand. I ask you to consider whether you would make a home with me that belongs neither to a sheet of gossip nor to a party of politicians, but to 2 people intent upon keeping their promises. I am not offering to rescue you. You require no rescue. I am offering to accompany you. If you agree, I will go where permission must be sought and ask it without apology. If you refuse, I will thank you for what you have already given me and spare you as much talk as I can. Will you be my wife? There are questions a heart expects in a lifetime and prepares small speeches for in private, never expecting to use them. Helena had none of these prepared, because people like her do not practice a prince asking them anything, but whether a cup is yet full. The room did not disappear. The room became in the way a narrow bridge becomes when it is the only path, and one perceives that it has been enough all along. She did not blush hard because blushing would have turned the moment into an illustration for a book she did not care to be in. She did not look around to seek permission. She had already given herself leave to answer such a question in a voice that belonged to her. "Yes," she said, not a yes that begged pardon for itself, a clear yes, as if agreeing to truth rather than luck. "Yes, I will." Mrs. Betts made a small sound, the exact cousin of a laugh one tries to smother and cannot. The manager bowed to the ledgers as if they had waltzed. Mr. Penworth's mouth did something that could be mistaken for a smile if you knew what to look for. Lady Eugenia, who had not planned for this, found that her eyes were suddenly the right amount of wet for once, not sticky with effort, but clean with relief. There followed the practicalities, which are the triumph of any romance that intends to live longer than a column inch. Adrian wrote the Prince Regent a letter that spoke less of love than of steadiness, which was a kind of love a government could understand. He spoke of a woman's respect for labour, a prince's respect for such respect, and the country's need for examples of propriety that looked like kindness rather than parade. The answer did not put on boots and run to them. Answers of that size never do. It walked in good time with a seal that meant not only approval, but convenience. The regent had his reasons. He always did. This time, some of them overlapped with decency. The day set for the ceremony was clear without boasting. The church was not grand, because grand makes a meal of people when it has nothing else to eat. The pews filled with those who had earned their place by standing in small rooms and not lying, Mrs. Betts with her mouth firm and her eyes gentle, Mr. Penworth in the same suit he wore for the most difficult hours because he could not be taught to dress a feeling, the garden manager in his best coat, which had the shape of numbers, Lady Eugenia and Miss Lydia, who had learned the right kind of shame and brought it with them like a token of passage, a footman who insisted on keeping his gloves on in case he had to carry something unexpected, and two maids from the laundry who had never seen a prince without a horse and did not trip because they told their knees to be brave. Helena wore a dress that had been altered so well you could not see the past in it. The hem did not scratch. Mrs. Betts had unpicked the canvas, turned it, stitched it smooth. The dress was not finery. It was proof that mending can be a kind of miracle if one has learned to do it with love. Her hair was parted simply, her hands were clean, her eyes were clear. Adrian stood at the front without pomp. He had brought only what he had promised, his word, his steadiness, and the ability to listen. The vicar spoke the words that have held so many, and yet always feel as if they were invented that morning for this pair and no other. Adrian's voice did not break on his vows. Men who break sometimes mean to show they are sincere. He needed no proof but the way he looked at Helena as if she were the exact measure God had ordered for him. Helena's voice was low and firm like a line, fisherman's or seamstress's, it did not matter, which knows the strength of its fibers. When the ring, a plain band of gold that had learned nothing flashy at the silversmith's, was set on her finger, Helena had a small and unexpected thought. That she had never hoped for this did not mean she had not wanted good. She had wanted a life that did not require her to use up her honesty as if it were kindling. She had wanted less fear and more tea. She had wanted one person to think of her first sometimes. This was that and more, and it did not frighten her because it was now hers to keep, and that is less like holding a jewel than like learning to carry a basket well. They left the church to the modest blessing of bells and cool air. The reception was no reception, not as the city knows them. It was 2 rooms full of people who know how to sit and speak without needing to be watched doing it. Mrs. Betts had seen to the sandwiches. The cook, who had declared she would not bake because everyone would make too much of the guest of honor and not enough of the pie, baked anyway and pretended not to care when they ate 2 slices as if taking medicine. Penworth stood a little apart and looked for once, as if he had arrived in a place without needing to leave again. The garden manager shook Adrian's hand like a ledger that has finally found its lost shilling. Lady Eugenia brought Helena into a small parlour when the necessary things had been said, and the quiet could bear a private sentence. She sat her down and held her hand, and smiled exactly like a woman who has arranged too much in her life, and finally gets to enjoy one outcome she did not arrange at all. "You will be welcome here as my friend," she said, "if you will have me. Not because of who you have married, but because of who you are. Sometimes I will bring you my failures to show you and you will pat my hand. Sometimes I will bring you cakes. Both are love." Helena laughed, and the sound stayed in the little room like a kind flame. "I will have you, my lady, and I will bring you my own failures, which sometimes look like anger when I am tired." Adrian entered then and stood in the doorway, not to interrupt, but to make himself visible. He offered his hand and Helena took it, and there was nothing complicated in the exchange. And yet the world outside had changed a little, and would not be put back in its previous shape. When, at last, everyone had gone, and the evening folded itself around the house like clean linen. Helena and Adrian found themselves at a small table with a teapot and 2 cups. The day had given them rings and names, and 1,000 glances full of meaning other people had sent them knowingly. This felt like a return to a country they had made by accident and chosen on purpose. "Would you pour?" Adrian asked. "I will if you will listen," Helena said. "To what?" "To the small things we have promised that grand things always forget." He smiled, a smile that began as a thought and reached his eyes and asked nothing but an answer. "Pour, then. I will listen." She poured, steady as ever. His hand brushed hers, not by accident, but by a decision so simple it could make a person cry if she allowed it. She did not. She let it be the joy it was, and put the cup in front of him and then her own in its place on the table, as if arranging the day's pieces into a pattern that would hold. "I will still work," she said, surprising neither of them. Not as before, perhaps. Not as much where people can think I do not mind not being seen. But I will do the work I know how to do. I will keep our table honest and our speech tidy. I will remind you on Tuesdays that you cannot rescue everyone. You can only choose correctly whom to stand with. And I, he said, will make rooms safe for you to speak in, not generous because I give them, but fair because you claim them. I will say no to dinners that would use your name like an ornament. I will say yes to walks where no one cares whether my hat has been brushed. I will bring you news only when it is real. I will keep my promises in small ways, because I wish to keep the large ones without making them a show. She lifted her cup. He lifted his. They drank. It was good tea. That goodness was not the main thing. It was a quiet proof that promises about small things are a scaffold that lets larger ones stand. The weeks that followed did not feel like a parade that never ends. They felt like a house, learning 2 sets of habits and blending them. Sometimes it was smooth. Sometimes Helena felt her old self bristle in a room where too much silk murmured. She allowed herself the bristle, then smoothed it with reason. Adrian sometimes forgot that love makes a man more public, not less, and then remembered and did not sulk. He learned the names of people Helena loved who had no titles, and he pronounced them correctly. She learned the names of people who wanted favor, and knew where to put them in the drawer so they would not clutter the table. The city, deprived of a grand scandal, grew bored faster than anyone expected. It moved on to a dog with interesting spots and a French hat with ambitions. The sheet that had printed the hint printed a correction written by a woman with an ear for tone, and the correction was read by all who matter when such things are measured rightly, the servants who carry tales. They saw the room for what it had been and nodded, pleased that someone had made truth fit to be repeated without embroidery. One afternoon, late enough that the light lay generously on the floorboards and made one wish to be kind without effort, Helena took Adrian to the Marchmont morning room and stood before the mantel where the miniature hung again in its rightful place. Miss Lydia came in shyly and apologized without words by pointing at a new pile of old letters whose edges were burnt. Lady Eugenia's eyes met Helena's over the girl's head, and gratitude passed between women and did not need to bow. Later still, in their own rooms, Helena took off her ring to wash her hands and put it back on without ceremony, the way one puts on an apron before kneading bread, knowing what tools are necessary for the day and not making a play of it. Adrian watched her as if watching competence could be as beautiful as watching a dance. For him it was. When the season blossomed again, invitations came written in careful hands that wanted to be associated with an idea. They accepted some and refused many. They went to gardens when the nights were apt and liked to stand near the lanterns, not because they wished to be admired, but because they enjoyed being ordinary in a place made for display. Once a woman whispered, "Is that the maid?" And her companion answered, "That is the princess," and both were wrong and right in the way the world is often wrong and right at once. Helena, hearing nothing, pointed out a child collecting fallen blossoms in her skirt, and observed that some people are happiest when they can gather beauty others have let fall. Time did what it does. It wrapped itself around days and made them years. It did not make them dull. It made them deeper. When troubles came, as troubles come to any house because the world is not a sorcerer granting wishes, but a room one must set to rights over and over, they met them with the same habit they had used that first night, and that long morning. Speak plainly, stand where witnesses can see, keep small promises, and let love teach decorum rather than the other way around. On a clear evening that did not announce itself as anything special, Helena set a teacup in front of Adrian and rested her palm on the table's edge. He reached out and placed his hand over hers. It had become their modest extravagance, that placing of hands. They did not grow tired of it. The world, she said, will have its way with names and pictures. It can keep them. I have this, and you. He smiled in that way of his that contained both mirth and solemnity, and never wasted either. Titles gather eyes, he said. Yes, she answered. Character gathers love. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.